So there you can hear an air alert, and I'm here in Odessa in Ukraine. It's 2024, beautiful weather here. Sun is splitting the stones, but unfortunately it is not that peaceful despite the backdrop and what seems like a pretty ordinary sunny days scene here in a seaside town. And in this video we're going to discuss the term Eastern Europe and what it really means, because those air alert sirens that you hear, they're indicative about how the definition geopolitically has changed dramatically in the last few years. I actually made a video a few years back, must have been probably about 7 years ago at this point, maybe longer, 6-7 years ago on my channel. And I'll even link it up above in the card down below in the description. If you're really interested to see what I said back then. And I speculated about where Eastern Europe and Central Europe and Western Europe, where all those terms really meant. Where was Ukraine in the mix? And I actually predicted that eventually would not be seen as Eastern Europe. Now, many years later, even some more mainstream commentators are starting to come to the same conclusion that Eastern Europe, if we're going to call it anything Eastern Europe, it's basically the revanchist Russian Empire, Russia, and the other countries that it still is able to control some way, and that is actually up that direction. And here is not Eastern Europe at all. So I'm going to go through what it means, Eastern Europe in 2024, and why personally I don't use the term when I'm talking about countries like Poland, 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Here in Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, none of that, I no longer refer to it as Eastern Europe because it no longer makes sense, and I've dubbed the term even New Europe. That describes it a lot more succinctly. So let's get into it. Поехали! So let's open up a map of Europe and take a look, because the concept of Eastern Europe, well, it's definitely not geographical. It is geopolitical, because if you look at the map, then even countries like Ukraine, where I am at the moment, are Central Europe, if not even Western Europe, one could argue. So if we look at from where Europe runs until it's kind of the Ural Mountains, basically is the normal cutoff point that we give geographically for Europe. And then when you see it on the map, you realize, okay, basically most of the places that are kind of controversially referred to as Eastern Europe, they're not Eastern in terms of their geographic location. Also, there are no real unifying topographical features that unite Eastern Europe. I mean, you got the Great European Plain, but that actually extends all the way into France. And no one's referring to France as Eastern Europe. And, you know, you have mountain ranges like the Carpathians, and you have big rivers like the Danube and the Dnieper River, and they cut through this region. So it's not unified geographically, but what it is unified by, or was unified by at one point, is geopolitics during the Cold War. In particular, we had the Warsaw Pact, and that included the Soviet Union and the satellite states that it controlled, like Poland, Czechoslovakia at the time before they split, East Germany. So in 1988, there was the Iron Curtain that obviously started after World War II. Winston Churchill referred to an Iron Curtain descending across Europe, or to the center of Europe. And basically, during the Cold War, we had Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and basically Western Europe was more or less under a NATO security umbrella. There were some neutral countries, or like Austria, for example, Finland, Sweden. So it didn't cut exactly, they were kind of in between, more or less, but you had East and West in Europe. And in the early 90s, obviously with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, first you had the unification of Germany, East and West Germany unified, and then gradually the communist regimes that were backed up by the Soviet Union, they had their puppet states, they started to pursue an independent foreign policy and domestic policy in those countries then. So these countries, they had, under Soviet domination, similar economic systems, so they were communist, they were authoritarian, it was hard to leave them, it was hard to get in, and basically they were also economically a lot weaker in this Eastern Europe than in Western Europe. And then obviously with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the end of communism, the kind of very rough transition, traumatic transition from central planned economies in the early 1990s to liberal democracies with capitalism. That was quite disruptive, but it was something that the countries in this region all went through at the same time. So it was something that I guess they also had in common. So just with the ending of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then the end of communism, the collapse of the partial decolonization of the Soviet Union, obviously split up into 15 new states. Russia became the successor state to the USSR. So basically Russia, I guess, in reality, partially decolonized. Then these countries, they didn't just suddenly be like Western Europe or Central Europe or become like Germany. Maybe even in East Germany, the eastern part of Germany, unified Germany, took a long time to catch up, and they went through the same kind of problems. So this idea of Eastern Europe, it definitely stuck as a term throughout the 90s. And then we begin to see change, I think, in the early 2000s. Part of what was known at the time as Eastern Europe, it started to join the same institutions, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to have the American security umbrella and other allies like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and they also joined the European Union. Many of the countries in this region, including some parts of the former Soviet Union. So they would be the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Other countries that were on the other side of the Iron Curtain, so in Eastern Europe, like Poland, Czechia, Slovakia. I mean, it's split into two countries since then. Parts of the Balkans, like Slovenia, they joined in the early 2000s. And then, even though these countries have been economically weak after communism, obviously they had that kind of shock therapy during the early 1990s, they were still way behind the countries in Western Europe. So they were going through a transition period economically to catch up. So that kind of Eastern Europe kind of stuck, but it started to make a lot less sense because obviously there's no Iron Curtain putting them on the other side and in the eastern part anymore. They're actually over on the side that have been Western, but basically they in general were economically weaker. Now there were some other countries that didn't get on that path to join NATO or join the European Union, and some that managed to go towards NATO and started the process maybe to join the European Union. There would be countries a lot in the Balkans like Montenegro. They joined NATO, they became an EU candidate country. Serbia became an EU candidate country but didn't apply to join NATO. North Macedonia also became a candidate country. But countries like, say, Ukraine or Moldova, they didn't apply for either. So they stayed in this kind of like, I guess, maybe leaning at times more towards Russia and at times leaning towards being more pro-European Union. And obviously now with this Russo-Ukrainian war, both Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia are now EU candidate countries. So they are now trying to join the Euro-Atlantic institution. So they're also trying to be on the other side of that, old Iron Curtain, so to say. Sometimes you hear people use the shorthand Slavic countries or Slavic peoples to describe this division, but there isn't really any pan-Slavic sentiment. I mean, it's divided between kind of East Slavs and West Slavs, and you have Slavs in the Balkans. And I think now that, especially with the Russo-Ukrainian war, you see a division also between the Slavs, even in the East Slavs, what are known as that would be Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians. I mean, obviously, Vladimir Putin makes speeches or writes long essays claiming they're all one people, but the reality is shown that that's not what the people in the Slavic people here want, and a large proportion of the Slavic people in Belarus don't want to be in the same polity as the Russians. And also, it doesn't really make that much sense to call Eastern Europe Slavic because there are lots of people who are just not Slavic, right? So you have Romanians, you have Hungarians, Estonians, Lithuanians, Latvians, all these people are not considered Slavic. But it goes even further than that. You have other ethnicities like Crimean Tatars, for example. You even have Volga Tatars or Tatars within Russia. There's Tatarstan. You have Kalmyks who are Buddhist. You have the Caucasian peoples, like I already mentioned, Georgians, Armenians, and Armenia is now and maybe even considering to go on the other side of that old Iron Curtain as well. So you just have a lot of different ethnicities that are not Slavic. Also, in terms of religion, there isn't a unifying religion in the region. You do have Orthodox Christianity, but that's also divided into lots of different denominations. You obviously have the, Russian Orthodox Church, but you have an Ukrainian Orthodox Church, you have a Romanian Orthodox Church, you have a Serbian Orthodox Church. Then you have, lots of Protestant religions like Lutheranism. That's significant. You have Catholics. Obviously, Poland is probably the most famous since Pope John Paul II was Polish. It's the same in Lithuania. That would be the main religion. Also in the western part of Ukraine, there's the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And there's also a lot of Muslims in the region. I mentioned already Crimean Tatars, you have Albanians, you have Bosnians. Obviously the Tatars in Tatarstan as well are Muslims. Some peoples in the Caucasus are Muslim, like Dagestanis or Chechens. So, and as I also said, Kalmyks, they're even Buddhists. So there isn't anything to really unify all the peoples that are there in terms of some sort of like broader ethnicity, like being Slavic or particular religion or particular language. Like Russian used to be the lingua franca, but that's declining, and you have a lot more of these local languages like Ukrainian here. You have Romanian and obviously in Romania, but also Moldova is national language. Polish. You have the three Baltic states have their own national languages. So there isn't anything to unify what was Eastern Europe in, say, the early 90s or the late 80s. And really it was the fact that it was geopolitical. They were under the domination of the Soviet Union and communism. So the new geopolitical division that's growing, the fissure that's definitely becoming clearer with this Russo-Ukrainian war, which started in 2014 and then intensified in 2022, is between Russia and the countries that is still able to control, and the countries that don't want to be in its orbit, which is most of Central Europe, where they previously dominated when the Soviet Union was there. And that's why obviously we have a large amount of conflict. We have the biggest war since World War II in Europe. That is here in Ukraine. Ukrainians do not want, the vast majority of Ukrainians do not want to be in the same sphere of influence under Russian domination. Also, there have been wars in, say, Georgia in 2008. Georgia is another country that wants, in principle, to leave Russia's sphere of influence. And you could even say back in the 90s with Moldova, there was a war in the separatist region, Transnistria. And there is the potential for more conflict in, say, the Baltics. So it is this new fissure that is dividing, if we're going to say that there's a Western Europe, and in Eastern Europe, it is in fact about 2,000 kilometers further to the east than it had been, say, in 1989. So the brand of Eastern Europe is something that people in, say, Central Europe, so countries like Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, maybe Hungary, it's something that in general they don't want to be associated with. So let's play this clip from about 20 years ago, a film that was quite funny, that, plays on stereotypes, but there is obviously a grain of truth in it, which is what makes it funny.
Beautiful. We made it to Berlin.
Ja. Berlin! Kein Schwein aus Berlin wird mich jemals hier in Bratislava finden.
Bratislava?
Ja. Bratislava!
Dear sweet mother of God, we're in Eastern Europe.
And this really was the zeitgeist 20 years ago. People really thought that it was that dystopian to to be in a place like Bratislava, which today is like kind of a quite pleasant city, reasonably high standard of living. It's kind of like a suburb of, you know, Vienna, right? I mean, it's not that drastically different, a bit, but not drastically. And certainly there aren't dogs walking around with human hands in their mouth. But really, like this image of Eastern Europe, in those days, that were people further to the west in Europe and definitely North America, that's what they had as an image. And I remember when there were the Euro football championships held jointly in Poland and in Ukraine in 2012, there were English football players who were black. They were worried about their families traveling to Poland and Ukraine because they would be in danger from the violent racists that would attack them. And they just had it in their image, this very backward, violent, dangerous, racist, bigoted place, probably also homophobic and misogynist. And how many black English football players' families were hurt in 2012? None. Zero. They had no problems at all. People were super friendly to them in general. They actually had a great time. So these stereotypes definitely continue. That was 2012. That was obviously a good bit after even the Euro trip. And, you know, and it's kind of something that I guess, you know, poverty porn is easy to sell, especially in this era now of being able to very easily produce your own content like I do on my channel, right? So another YouTube channel that used to focus on this broader region was Bald and Bankrupt, produced by Ben Rich. And yeah, he kind of went with that theme, right? You know, showing extreme poverty, backwardness, violence at times, alcoholism, what other stereotypes did he have? Kind of crazy babushka grandma who's, you know, got Soviet nostalgia. He was going around filming all this Soviet stuff everywhere and representing that as kind of, you know, it exists. It's not like he made it up, but it is a particular small part of, you know, the culture in this region in reality, right? Especially when you're in a country like Ukraine or, you know, the Baltics, Poland, those places, Czechia. Maybe, you know, and it definitely is more representative the further east you go, especially when you cross out of here. So that kind of like more Bald and Bankrupt style of like the village alcoholics who are violent and, you know, wish they were living back in the Soviet times. Those people exist, but it's not represented. Like in my videos, I obviously show a completely different side of the region, which doesn't correspond with that at all. It's like complete opposite. And you could go to the UK and you could film similar stuff. And what? Does that mean that England is, you know, some dystopia? Absolutely not. So I think in the popular imagination that, you know, corresponds with people's, maybe it's somewhere in the back of their mind, their image of Eastern Europe. And I think that branding is definitely something that, yeah, the people of, in large part of this region, don't want to be associated with, because that's what they're actually trying to escape, especially in places like Ukraine or Poland. They're trying to escape that image. That means basically being under Russian domination, right? That was the reality to a certain extent. You just look at the GDP per capita, just take it as, you know, it's not a perfect measurement of quality of life, but look what it was like when, we'll say, the big bang of EU accession in 2004. Look how far back those countries were compared to today, where they've caught up with a lot of countries in Western Europe, like Spain and Portugal. And, you know, Poland is projected to overtake the United Kingdom, Brexit Britain, which obviously left the European Union a few years ago. Poland is forecast to overtake the United Kingdom in GDP per capita. We don't know if that will happen, but that is the projection. Think about that. It has been a huge economic success story by leaving Eastern Europe and joining the European Union and been on that track. You know, we have to dive deep always in methodology of how people are calculating these studies. But I mean, just look at the countries that, well, didn't strive to join the European Union in the late 90s, early 2000s, like here in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Russia. Look at their GDP per capita. Well, it's way behind Poland and the Baltics, for example, right? It's about half or a quarter, depending which you know, country you're looking at. So there's just a crazy difference, right?
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe.
So with this new dividing line, this new Iron Curtain, that's not yet fossilized, been moved 2,000 odd kilometers further to the east, what do we call this area in between, where the Iron Curtain was in 1989 and where it is today, starting to form? Well, I refer to it as New Europe, because we have Old Europe, which is kind of like Western Europe, or if you don't consider Poland, the Baltics as part of the, part of Western Europe, we could use that description, but I think it is more helpful to refer to Old Europe, New Europe, and basically Russia is more than welcome to maintain the moniker of Eastern Europe, considering the way it is governed and the way it behaves and what its future looks like, which is markedly different to the future in New Europe. And kind of ironically, I often hear Russians say, when they go on a trip, to say, well, it's probably not going to happen very much in the future, but when they were going on trips, say to the Baltics or to Poland or maybe some part of Western Europe, they always say that they go to Europe, which kind of indicates that they've come from somewhere outside Europe, even if they've come from Moscow or St. Petersburg, which is kind of interesting, but maybe they don't consider themselves really European in that sense. But looking at the map, they're definitely geographically on the continent in the eastern part of it. So they can keep that moniker, that label, Eastern Europe, and definitely the way that it's been run, authoritarian, heading towards totalitarianism, bleak economic prospects as they spend like between 30 and 40% of their state budget on either suppressing their own people or attacking Ukrainians. And, they're facing an absolute demographic implosion because it's already, like a lot of Europe, in a difficult situation. But now they're sending so many men who are going to die or be invalided in fighting against other Europeans like here in Ukraine, that it's really, it's a different system over there for sure than it is here. And, New Europe is more attractive for, that's why I documented here on my channel so much, because, it's catching up with the rest of Europe. Imagine you have bought real estate in Poland 10, 15 years ago. What would it be worth now? Just an average. It's just like, it's going in the right direction. Those economies further in the West in Europe, they're more mature economies. And, if you look at the GDP per capita, how it compares to the US over the last 20 years, it's actually taken a slight dip relative in places like the UK, France. But here in New Europe, if you look at, say, places like Poland or the Baltics, like it's catching up so quickly. As I said, Poland predicted to overtake the UK by 2030 in GDP per capita. It's pretty crazy, right? So this is the region that, it just happens to have other things like, because of a legacy of having suffered under communism, they don't tend to like high taxes as much, and they don't have as much of the kind of woke culture as you see further to the West. There are other things that, obesity isn't such a big problem either as is in the core Anglosphere, in North America. And I have all that outlined in another video. I'll link it up above on a card down below in the video description. And, it was interesting also that just recently there were some protests in Georgia against a new law that resembled a law in Russia that was going to label NGOs as foreign agents. As a foreign agent law that was quite controversial and used by the Russian government to clamp down on dissent. Obviously, you don't have proper freedom of speech or freedom of press in Russia or proper elections anymore. And the crowd was chanting, Georgia is not Russia. Because Georgia, the people of Georgia, they want to be in New Europe. They don't want to be in Eastern Europe. So now that you're better informed about where Eastern Europe is and is not, I'm actually here in a city that is often referred to as being in Eastern Europe. I'm in Chisinau in Moldova, just up the road from Odessa. And if you are looking to visit this region and you want to grab my secret places for some of these cities, then down below in the description, I have a free PDF. Go down and grab it right now. And if you are interested in exploring some of the other cities in this region, potentially for relocation, 3 to 12 months per year, as my clients do, I'm going to put up a playlist which has a series of city vlogs from this region with my clients in general. So go check that out if you want to get a bit more of the flavor of this region, what I'm dubbing New Europe. So on that note, as you can see, a little bit of Easter spirit here. Got the eggs, and I got some bunnies probably over there as well. Obviously more a family affair. This kind of scene. I'm going to say La Revedere from Chisinau, Moldova.
SAR Experience.